Hi everyone, welcome back. We are speaking today about another episode of medieval Middle Eastern history, and specifically we're going to be speaking about Shi'ism. You might have heard of Shi'is. They are present today predominantly in Iran, but also in parts of Central Asia, in parts of South India, and also in the areas of Lebanon. But we're going to be looking at how it is that Shi'ism came to be. How did it appear? What actually formed Shi'ism and what was going on during the sort of Abbasid period from the 8th to the 10th century or so. Now, a bit of background, if you guys remember, the idea of Shi'ism is that authority and that leadership of the Muslim community should actually stay in the family of the Prophet Muhammad. Now, the Prophet Muhammad did not have any sons, but he did have one surviving daughter. That daughter is Fatima. She married a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad named Ali, who becomes the son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad, and they have children. Ali is assassinated by the Kharijites in 661. His son Ali Hussein dies at Karbala in 680 in the fighting with the First Civil War, or I guess in the Second Civil War at this point. And then in the 750, basically, the Abbasids come to power. And one of their key claims to legitimacy is that we're going to restore back the Prophet Muhammad's house. We're going to bring back the family of the Prophet Muhammad into leadership. Of course, what they had in mind was not to put in a descendant of Ali, but actually to say that they themselves were part of this family of the Prophet Muhammad, because the idea of the general family or general was much broader than what we would consider today. It was a bit of a bait and switch. In any case, that idea continues to have pull, and in fact, one of the things that the Caliph Al-Ma'mun does when he's trying to regain legitimacy after his own civil war is that he says, you know what, we're going to go down the Alid family route, and we're going to appoint temporarily, as it turns out to be, an Imam Ali al-Ridda, one of the descendants of Ali, in as his heir. Now, what we're going to do is, so the point here is that there's always been this strong feeling that leadership of the Muslim community has to be in the hands of someone who's descended from the Prophet Muhammad, and in fact, that family connection, that what we call Alidism, was present even in the early days. Alidism is in like the sense that it's connected to Ali, and it continues to develop. But we're going to look at how it develops into something we call Shi'ism today. Remember, Shia means party of Ali. So what happened to those who wanted the descendant to the Prophet Muhammad to rule? Well, what they end up happening is they move from this kind of general pro-Ali sentiments into a sort of essentially another theological sect of Islam with a different approach to basic core beliefs. And this is done in relationship to the changes that are going to occurring to Islam at the time. So one of the things we've talked about is the development of the Hadith party, Hadith collecting culture, what ends up becoming Sunnism, and so forth. But what we're going to look at is basically the other side of that, the people who don't go down the idea that the Sunni idea, which is that authority is dispersed amongst the community, the best of the community, the most pious and most scholarly people in it, but instead remains located in the body of people who are directly descended from the Prophet Muhammad and his family. One thing to remember, Shia. The word Shia is related to the word Alid, as you see here in the bottom. And Alid is kind of just a general supporter, someone who thinks that Ali is special and deserves their support. Most, actually, Muslims at that time were like that. But a Shi'i is someone who is basically follows essentially a separate sect of Islam. It's still a Muslim, but has different basic beliefs about the nature of leadership, and therefore, and then ultimately different rights and religiosity. The word Shia comes from the idea Shi'at Ali, the party of Ali, the partisans of Ali. And so a person who is a partisan of Ali is called a Shi'i. Now, over time in this period, what we really see is that we basically have a specific collection of Shi'i beliefs and practices at the same time as the Shi'is themselves start fragmenting into different, sometimes competing branches, and eventually actually also start competing states. So to go back to compare Sunnis, as they're developing at this period, they start calling themselves the Ahl al-Sunnah wa Jama'ah, people of tradition and majority opinion, or tradition and consensus. And they basically believe, remember, that the caliph is not a religious authority. The religious authority is in the hands of the scholars. They believe that everyone should just accept whoever is in charge politically, as long as there's that separation between religion and power. And then ultimately they agree that there's 4 rightly guided caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman. That is the 4 rightly guided initial leaders of the early period. In contrast, what Shi'is come to believe is that there has to be leaders descended from the Prophet Muhammad. These leaders are going to be called imams. An imam is someone who stands up. It literally means to stand up in front of someone. But in this case, it's a leader. Today, it means like a prayer leader. But what they're talking about, a Shi'i imam is the leader of the entire community. And it has to go through one branch, right? So the Abbasids claim to be also descendants of the Prophet Muhammad, but that's because they were like descendants of an uncle, of a cousin of the Prophet Muhammad, Abbas. But this wasn't the case. The Shia say that no, that branch has to be the direct line from Ali and Fatima. And that's because there is some sort of special light, a special divine light that adheres to the descendants of the Prophet through Muhammad, and then to Ali, and then to his sons. That's being passed down from father to son, albeit I understand there's a son-in-law connection there in the beginning, but it's passed down to Ali. And that is what makes their leadership special. But of course, that's not going to happen anytime soon. So what they're waiting for ultimately is a sort of Mahdi figure. A Mahdi is a sort of divinely guided leader, someone who's going to come and save the community. I can almost say it's a sort of Messiah-like figure. The point being is that they're ultimately going to come and put a descendant of Ali on the throne and fix all the injustice and evil in the world. Now, the question, of course, ultimately, when you have a situation like that, there's often open to a lot of splits, because the question is, well, who is going to be the right imam? You know, sometimes you get clear hereditary passage from one generation to the next, but sometimes there's 2 sons, sometimes one dies early, one ends up happening, and there's all these splits in the community. Basically, the Shia movement splits amongst different descendants who claim to be imams. So let's look at the first one. That is the Zaydis, who actually started in the period of the Umayyads, right? Before the Abbasids, there's a figure named Zayd bin Ali, Zayd, son of Ali. He started a rebellion, an early rebellion in 1740 in Kufa, to try to put up a descendant of the Prophet of the house of Ali into power. And he argued that ultimately that, power should go, that it's ultimately up to righteous Muslims themselves to rise up and fight injustice, and that anyone who could do so actually could be imam. And so he nominated himself. His rebellion was eventually put down, his followers dispersed, but they reconvened a few centuries later. They kind of managed to consolidate in Yemen, and in the highlands of Yemen, because Yemen has highlands and lowlands, very different cultures, very different climates. In the highlands of Yemen, they set up a dynasty that actually lasted for over 1,000 years. That is the Zaydis. Sometimes they're called Fivers because they basically believe that the imamate lasts only until the 5th imam, which would be Zayd ibn Ali, or before him. And so this was eventually put down with when Yemen turned into a communist country in the 1960s. But the Zaydis continue to be a prominent presence in Yemen today. Now, most people supporting Ali didn't join the Zaydi rebellion. They actually joined with the Abbasids. They really were expecting the Abbasids to put on a descendant of Ali onto the throne, but then the Abbasids said, no, it's actually us. We're going to be the ones taking power. We're the ones who are descended from um, from the house of the Prophet Muhammad. And so what they end up as Shiism continued in this period and Sunnism develops, they kind of end up defining themselves against some of the core Sunni beliefs. So if the Sunnis believe in what we call political quietism, that is accepting whoever's in charge as long as they don't mess with the religion, the Shias say that no, actually the first, we don't accept the idea of first four caliphs being rightly guided. Actually, it was Ali who should have been there from the beginning. The first three are actually should be rejected. And that they think that Ali had basically a sort of super secret knowledge, a special divine light that was then passed down through his sons. And then eventually a justice would be brought to this world by a Mahdi who was going to put one of these descendants of Ali on the throne. And they actually start developing different rituals from ultimately what becomes Sunnism to differentiate themselves. One of the things that they commemorate is Ashura, the moment when Hussein is killed in Karbala. And that there's ultimately a pilgrimage out to the place in Karbala where Hussein was killed, sometimes called the Arba'in, or the 40 days, which is actually one of the largest pilgrimages in the world, if not the largest currently, where people flock to his tomb. And essentially these different imams continued to exist and go on. One of the most important ones is the figure of Ja'far al-Sadiq, who is actually also an important hadith collector, I believe, and passer on of traditions. He reconciled with the Abbasids. He worked with them, took out some of the more extremist rebellion strands of Shia theological belief and kind of put down those aspects of his party. But he had a problem. His son, Ismail, died before he did. Right? So if these guys are supposed to be passing on divine light, and Ja'far is now passed on the divine light to his son, to his oldest son Ismail, and then Ismail dies, what does that mean? Well, ultimately they have a big kind of different fallout. It takes a long time, but the third son, Musa al-Kazim, takes leadership. This continues the line until the 11th Imam dies in 874, right? So the kind of still high period of the Abbasids. This Imam, the 11th Imam al-Hasan al-Askari, dies without a son. Now the divine light is basically extinguished. So what is going on? Some people say that what they argued was that there's actually a 12th Imam, that his son was actually in hiding, but he was waiting for the right time to come out. He was in what's called occultation. And so therefore that son is going to come out when the time is right, but right now he has too many enemies, there's too many bad vibes out there, and he has to hide for what it is. Luckily, there were 4 ambassadors that were able to speak to him and represent him until they died in 941, and then basically this great occultation began. So now this 12th Imam is not only hiding, but he's actually going to hide until the end of time, until basically this Mahdi Messiah-like figure comes in and puts him on the throne and restores justice to the earth. And in the meantime, basically scholars, people who are knowledgeable about Shia traditions and ideas, actually will rule in his place. Now what that ends up meaning is that by this point, 941, you'll have a Shi'ism that's actually kind of similar to what Sunnism is, in that the authority rests in the hands of the scholars. Ultimately, that's what ends up happening in Iran. These scholars ultimately argue, well, you know what, we can have a state of scholars where the people who are the religious scholars can actually also be the political leaders as well, and take on formal power in that sense. That's after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. That's what Khomeini argues with this velayat faqih. But these are all debates essentially over what is proper leadership in the early Muslim community. Who does leadership stand with? And ultimately, both the Sunnis and the Shias kind of devolve leadership onto the side of scholars rather than keeping religious leadership in the hands of one person. though, for example, in Catholicism, the Pope becomes the main figure. I just want to point out a few things that actually a number of Shia kingdoms emerge during the kind of as the Abbasids start breaking apart politically after the year in around the year 900, 1000. So specifically over here in Egypt, there is a Fatimid kingdom. In Yemen, there is in areas that are Zaydi. In other parts, there's actually a number of different Shia kingdoms, including here in Iraq, the Buyids are themselves somewhat Shia. One of these groups is what are called the Seveners or Ismailis. They end up emerging out of the Fatimid Caliphate. The Seveners are people who believe that, originally that basically the seventh Imam was the last Imam. Doesn't go all the way to the 12th Imam, just ends at 7. And these people ultimately establish a kingdom in Egypt called the Fatimid Caliphate. We're not going to go into it, that's for another class. But they have created a new capital, and they actually establish a variety of mosques in Cairo, in their new capital. The city of Cairo itself is a creation of the Fatimid dynasty. One of the interesting ones is this one of Al-Hakim. Al-Hakim is the kind of leader of the Fatimid Caliph who is ruling in Cairo at that time, and you can still go to his mosque today and see it. He was a bizarre figure who also tried to mass convert Jews, went around at night incognito and wandered around the city, did all sorts of different things, claimed to have different mystical visions and so forth, until one day during one of his night patrols, he disappears completely. No one knows what happened to him. Did he get murdered? Did he just run away? What exactly happened is not clear, but he disappears. Now, there's some people who essentially believe that he actually went into a sort of hiding and he was divinely inspired. His followers end up running away and setting up kind of colonies or strongholds out in the mountains of Lebanon and Syria. Those people would end up becoming the Druze. If you've ever heard of the Druze, they are basically distant Ismaili Shias who believe in the divine nature of Al-Hakim. Like most of these breakaway Shia groups, they essentially believe that these figures are that they have some special divine light that is then passed down through a special group of leaders in the community. So they might have holy books, but those are not shared very openly and only to a small insider group within the leaders. Today, the Druze are basically found in Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. The Druze also in Israel are one of the few groups that non-Jewish groups that serve in the army. Another son of Al-Hakim, Nizar, actually also kind of gets a crazy following, has various claims, etc. Eventually he's eliminated, but his followers retreat out to the deserts of Iran. They end up in the Syrian and Iranian deserts, and they often end up in a castle called Alamut, which is in the Iranian world, and they spend their time trying to defend themselves from their opponents by assassinating significant figures. And in fact, even the word assassin comes from a derogatory word used to call these Ismailis. They were called hashishin because everyone thought that they were drug addicts who were taking a bunch of hashish at that time. And in fact, they kind of told stories about how they would get really high and then go out on these assassination missions, etc. And from the word hashishin, we get the word assassin. Long story short, to skip to a few things, these Nizari Ismailis continue to exist, but they moved out from Iran to different parts, and they made actually a big jump in the 19th century when they expanded heavily into South Asia. And in South Asia, the communities there became extremely wealthy merchants and had a lot of success. Many of them branched out went with the British to Africa, where they set themselves up in Uganda or Kenya. um, and therefore also became a massive diaspora throughout the world, including many Ismailis in the West. The leader of the Ismailis is still claims to be descended from these original leaders. His name is the Aga Khan. This is the previous Aga Khan. He just died, but he was, basically a super rich guy. Why is he so rich? Because he gets a tithe from technically every pious Ismaili, sends money out to them. They reinvest this money in a bunch of public projects, building gardens in Cairo, museums of Islamic art, and a whole variety of other things in places where there are traditional Shia or Ismaili communities. So here is the former Aga Khan with the Queen Elizabeth. Both of them died. This was his wife.